press *6 to unmute.
Chairman,
Honorable
did you hear me? Oh, I'm sorry.
Honorable Begay. Honorable Stewart.
Oh, Shana, Chairman.
Go ahead.
Okay, Chairman Nez Aron da Conshana, Mr. Freeland, so Aro Kodo, so Shija Yeja, Mr. Walker, Aro Shana, Ken Honor, Mr. Daniels, and Mr. Begay, non Aro Shama Yeja Shami, Aro Mr. Tahi, staff, so Shamamas Khan, so Aro and da Kona, so Eastern Land Board members and Othanigi board, Aro community members, so Aro Haitian is not on this morning, BIA, the staff and Othanigi. Mr. Mahoja and his staff, Aro and Mr. Shabala, if he's online, and then the staff from Department of Agriculture, so and Division of Natural Resources, honest way, good morning. You didn't need to let Wilson C. Stewart Jr. Age, you don't quit so many age. Nanich, I just catching a bus chain, catching the shade up between the Chanel, Aro Alcodo, tell that he just hushed this morning, Aro. Although every benchmarks on it, so like health sheet when the don't hit without chaos and every benchmarks on it for Defiance Agency as a representation for the Resource Development Committee. I'll consortium.
Thank you very much, Honorable Stewart. Jay Rick News and she has son slow Zay Twitchin, Bashir Chin, Suna, Bitlash Chero, can't on it as you know what I and Enchla has Tonga chapters, Spanish, Nishigaya, Hogback, San Juan, Nahniza, Upper Fruitland, Burnham, and Newcomb. Welcome, everybody. Certainly appreciate the prayer by Mr. Herbert Enrico here in Hudson's and Irrigation and I. Let's move down to RDC staff. Mr. Tahi.
Good morning, Chair, members of RDC. My name is Rodney Tahi. I'm the new legislative advisor for RDC. I'm Kia'ani and Senja Kine, and I'm originally from Steamboat, Arizona. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Begay.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Resource Development Committee. Shaya Shami Begay, Shado Lane Ichida Gonasha, Nakainan Shlon the Betlishan Bashishin, Topa Hit Ada Shiche, Hachini, Ada Shanala Sanansha. Although I've been with Resource Development for 31 years and I will be signing off on September 30th. So today and tomorrow I will be back up for the new RDC advisor. Mr. Chair, members committee, back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Begay. Ms. Woody.
Mr. Chair, RDC members, the Eastern Land Board and also thinking hito anos koyat benen hitishnido late and then the BIA staff too. Good morning, she ya Teresa Woody and Chiedo and le hoyet then go steamboat then I didn't nasha kapaha and show the battalion the bushes chin kia on it as chedo and najini it as shinala. Ahot o any house see do late Ado and Mr. Enrico yeah and General Ratadinson quite ocean journal here that yeah Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Woody. From Speaker's Office, Ms. Yako.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Resources and Development Committee. Shea Melinda Arbizo, Siako Yanshado, Sananjini Shlonki, Ani Bashichin, Dotudini Dashado, Dashini Dashanella. I'm currently a legislative staff assistant for the Office of the Speaker here in Winter Rock, Arizona. And thank you for having us on the call. Thank you very much.
Thank you. From from BIA Regional Director, Mr. Mahoja.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Greg Mahoja, Regional Director, Navajo Region. I also have with me my team from the Eastern Navajo Agency, as well as Ms. Curley, my Tribal Government Officer. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lester Sosi.
Good morning, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Chair Lester Sosin, Chair Trochen and Sonanist, as was Chin, as she that's the chair na Kidney Nationale. It's an honor to make a presentation later on for the committee. Thank you. I have my staff, Jerry DeGroat, our Realty Officer on the line, Daniel Larger, Deputy Superintendent, and Effie Delmar, our Natural Resources Manager. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cheryl Curley.
Good morning, Chairman Nez, RDC members, everyone
Please,
on the call.
Ms. Curley, just pause one moment, please. Everybody that's on the line, please mute your phones. Thank you. Ms. Curley, you may proceed.
Good morning, RDC Chair, RDC members, Cheryl Curley, BIA, Navajo Region. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeGroat. Mr. Leo Watchman.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Resource Committee, also audience and staff, and the various agencies. We'll be on the line along with Ivan Vicente with the Ranch Program, Eastern Navajo, also Ferdinand Nota with Eastern Navajo Land Board. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We also have with us from BLM, Mr. Tafoya.
Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff Tafoya with the Farmington Field Office, BLM. Thanks for having us today. Joining me on the call is also a couple of the range staff members, Robert Cope and Barbara Whitmore. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anthony Begay. Anybody else wishing to introduce themselves, you may do so now.
I'm sorry, Chair. This is Anthony Begay. I had to unmute myself. My name is Anthony Begay, Land Board member for Miranda Lake and Tiff Lake, also District 16 chairperson.
Thank you. Next.
Good morning, Shinandai, a member of RDC, Shea, Herbert, and Rico here. District 20, the chair, for Crown Point and Little Water, and also Joint Land Board chair with Ariad and then don't answer the Akia, Arokia, Ani, Katnisani, that's it, okay, that's it, Jaskide, that's another what I didn't mention.
Thank you. Next.
Good morning, Chair. This is Philford from Office of the President, Vice President. I've been listening in. Although back after the date, because the chair is Slido last year was chain, and that's a chair. It was chain. That's have a good day.
Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Philford. Next.
Good morning. It's Daniel Augustine. I'm a counselor in Encino. I'm a land board member from District 19. Just want to say good morning, everyone, to the RDC members and BLM and BIA. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Yep. Hey, this is Clyde Yazzie with Eastern
Agency Land Board, District 20. I represent Whitehorse Lake, Sand Springs, and Recon Marcus. Dodan National Tlokibashis Chino Tachin, Sana Geneda Sanal, Do here, Grand Hadash, I do she combanded any dope and yes, he kai George at the Lincoln Somodishna. Dona here.
Yeah, Mr. Yazzie. Next. None. Kushila, let's move right along into the purpose of our meeting. Koro is to discuss the tri-party agreement, the Memorandum of Understanding that is in place with Eastern Navajo Land Board, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Land Management, as well as DNR Department of Agriculture. The Resources and Development Committee requests for a historical update on the agreement and whether if the agreement effectively works for the Navajo people in Eastern Navajo Agency, and whether if there is a need for an amendment to the existing agreement. RDC further requests whether all parties to the agreement is carrying out their roles and responsibilities with respect to the grazing management in Eastern Navajo Agency. Memorandum of Agreement Understanding Olgego. Eastern Land Board and the BIA do BLM. Nishigishi Hotao Inshanish Inils and Dole Tadini go Edinal Sospe Hadalia. Ako Karenat Andanil iso hate out at the Hagi the Hasht Edol ni Egishben Yekosanit Lido and that the Kate Onshanish Alzenigiti Tag with the whole Tahaki Gnan starts at Didi, Ike has ongo, Yenanish. So before I provide any time to the presenter, I would like to give time to our honorable member of RDC from Eastern, Honorable Mark Freeland.
Chairman, colleagues, staff, everyone on this call, as well as the BIA and the BLM. Thank you very much. I appreciate us taking this time from our schedules, and I appreciate us making this day come to reality. I know we had several instances where we had to reschedule. That was beyond our control, unfortunately, because we had other council or Nabikiatikit matters to attend to, so those always take precedence. So our land boards from Eastern, all of our land boards, District 15, District 19, District 20, and District 16. Good morning, our leadership from Koangi Eastern Navajo Agency. Want to say thank you, and we look forward to this discussion, and we look forward to moving forward with updating and bringing this tri-party agreement to today's standards, and we look forward to bringing some resources and some help to all our programs. Department of Ag, thank you for being on the line, and thank you to the Bureau of Indian Affairs as well as to the Bureau of Land Management. We have I always like to say, I always tell my colleagues on the council, we're always at a disadvantage out here in Eastern Navajo, and the complexity of land status is what we're up against. 23 different land statuses. And I'm really thankful that my colleagues are on the line from RDC to be educated and understand fully what we're up against out here. Whether it's cases like this or cases of rights-of-ways or just doing, dealing with other issues out here in Eastern Navajo Agency. So very much thankful for this morning and this opportunity to listen in, as well as this discussion. Chairman and RDC members, I just want to express again my gratitude and appreciation to you all to the staff and as well as to our leadership from Eastern Navajo Agency. I have to head up to White Rock at 11:30. So I'll be on the road here shortly, another couple hours, but I'll be on the call, Chairman. Want to get as much in as possible. I don't know if we have any of our legislative counsel or Department of Justice attorneys on the line. I know there might be discussion related to updating the agreement or having to update the agreement. Legalities, if that's the case, hopefully we can have somebody from OLC or DOJ on the line to listen in and kind of give us some direction as far as what we need to do. I don't know if the agreement itself will need to be legislated, if there's a legislation that needs to be agreed, but I would like to see, get input from our leadership, from our land boards, and see how we can proceed forward on getting this agreement, this tri-party agreement updated, and real important discussion today, Chairman. But Ada, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Freeland. So, Honorable Freeland, are you requesting some legal assistance? Because Ms. Khan is on a separate meeting at this time, but we can have staff reach out to Department of Justice if you want them on the call. Perhaps Veronica Blackshat can get on the call.
That would be good, Chairman. That would be good. That way, we can just get some direction as far as what do we need to do. And if we don't get him, that's okay too. Maybe Mr. Watchman or the department staff can guide us as far as how we need to proceed forward, and of course getting input from the BLM and the BIA too. What agreements do we need to come to, or what understandings do we need to come to? Just moving forward and proceeding forward, and we'd like to see if we can just get some guidance from them if we have to at some point, Chairman. Eddie, thank you.
Okay, so
Mr.
if we
Chair?
really need to, yes, Mr. Tahi.
Mr. Chair, this is Shami. Just for your information, in the past, the former Resource Development Committee, they had to legislate the agreement, even just to amend the agreement, to extend the date and time on it. So it had to go through a 164 review process in order for RDC to consider and amend the agreement. So that does need to happen at some point in time when the group are ready, after they had reviewed and revised the agreement accordingly. They will need to go through a 164 review process. And once that process is completed, then RDC can sponsor that legislation and it'll come before RDC. Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Begay, for that. I believe as we go along, we will pretty much decide on what amendments will be moving forward and have our legislative counsel, perhaps Honorable Freeland, since he's from that area, can request this legislation at that time. And thank you for letting us know, Ms. Begay. Certainly appreciate your assistance always. So who said, Mr. Chair?
Freeland.
Honorable Freeland, go ahead.
Chairman, I guess we should probably get some background then, maybe from Department of Ag, or get a little bit of information to see where the tri-party agreement currently stands. What do we need to do to proceed forward, and what do we need to do to move forward with the potential legislation? So it'd be good to get that background today or this morning. So I just want to mention that, Chairman Adia, and of course input from our land boards on previous experience or past experience, what they might have come up against too. So Adia, Chairman, thank you.
With that being said, Honorable Freeland, we have an agenda under presentation number 3. If you go to C, the last part of that sentence, it's a question. It says, and any recommendations for modification to existing cooperative agreement. I believe at that time, we can have that discussion as well, Honorable Freeland. and perhaps Mr. Watchman can touch up on it under B when we get to B, Honorable Freeland. There you go. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Freeland. Number 3 on presentation. A, brief summary of the history relative to the establishment of the Cooperative Agreement for the checkerboard areas and delegated responsibilities, amendments thereafter to the Cooperative Agreement. I will now give time to Superintendent of Eastern Navajo Agency, Mr. Lester Sosi, as well as Mr. Jerry D. Grote. Mr. Sosi?
Good morning. Can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, sir. Really want to say thank you very much, Chairman Nez, for coordinating this meeting so that we can talk about a very important document that we use for grazing management, Eastern Navajo Agency. Also appreciate committee members being on the call, especially Delegate Freeland from Eastern Navajo Agency, who's been a strong advocate for proper management of the rangeland out here. Very, very supportive of producers and others in the Eastern Navajo Agency. Also want to thank the Navajo Nation staff that have been working closely with us on our side in terms of working on the different administrative work that we have to do. I want to also recognize Land Board, the chair and members from the Land Board. We appreciate their feedback, their recommendations as we discuss this important topic. Lastly, I want to mention that I'll be making a presentation with Mr. Jerry DeGroat, our Realty Officer, as well as Effie Delmore, our Natural Resource Manager. And certainly anybody can ask a question anytime if you like. But I wanted to also verify that we did send out the copies of the presentation. Mr. Chair, I don't know if committee members received that.
Mr. Sosi, we did get one a PowerPoint presentation, which is before us at this time, and it was sent out by Ms. Curley, so we have it right before us. Thank you.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we'll use that presentation as a reference presentation for the discussion today. It is an 18-slide presentation, and we want to be as concise in making the presentation so that committee members can also get some opportunity to ask questions. So if we may, let's go ahead and move into making the presentation. If you look at slide 2, we have a training agenda. These are the areas that we'll be speaking to today. We'll discuss the definitions, look at it more from a historical perspective. What were some of the drivers, the factors in the past that eventually evolved into formal documents to be used by, certainly with BLM and BIA, and then inviting the Navajo Nation at a specific time. We'll discuss some of the general principles that might have been discussed in earlier years to formalize an agreement. Then we're going to go into some detailed information about how the document evolved through time. So you'll see some graphics and timeline chronology, which does have some summary on the history and purpose. Then we develop a kind of a concise timeline changes on the evolution of that document. Hopefully that will summarize all the specific key actions that happen in making the changes. We'll discuss briefly about land exchanges. We'll also talk about summaries of responsibilities. Again, this is BIA's perspective on and observing and analyzing the information. We'll move towards need for modification and then going forward what needs to happen. So we're making some recommendations. Mr. Chair, you'll see in this presentation, we'll be speaking to both item B and C, I believe, off the agenda. I'm sorry, item A and B. So keep that in mind as we move through this presentation. We'll be speaking to some of those topics there. To begin with, you'll notice that in the past, there's different ways that these documents have been described. So if you look at slide 3 there, we came up with a summary of the definitions that we found through the different documents and different discussions that happened in the past. So the main one are these 3 that we have heard being discussed in different areas. The Memorandum of Understanding, so this is the beginning back in September 1949, where BIA and BLM developed an understanding document to coordinate on addressing grazing administration and range management within Eastern Agency. At the time, it was, I think, deemed as the BLM Grazing District 7. So that's the Memorandum of Understanding, and we'll continue to describe it as that, the document that we have. There's been some other ways that people have described this MOU. One is a cooperative agreement. So in February 1965, you'll note from the timeline discussion that BIA and BLM invited the Navajo Nation as a cooperative entity to join in the MOU that was established back in 1949. So the enhanced MOU was then described as a cooperative agreement, and also lays out more the details of the administration of the grazing management in Eastern Navajo Agency. Then there's this description that has been used also, and I think that we need to just provide a little bit of clarification there. Some individuals have been calling the MOU a tri-party agreement. But yet, if you look closely at history and some of the documents that were used, the agreement that I think that should properly be described is that was used to develop, to address, coordinate, and implement land exchanges in northwestern New Mexico. The reason why I think the tri-party agreement was developed was to address trespass and unauthorized use. And the tri-party agreement was used for land exchanges. And I think sometimes folks synonymously say the tri-party agreement and MOU. So we wanted to give some clarity on the definitions of these 3 concepts and documents. Now, going on to slide 4, folks can ask, like, so what were some of those drivers that happened in the past, and how does that give us some good information on how the documents were developed? So I think if you look at the different entities across Eastern Navajo Agency, there's numerous stakeholders, and we kind of categorize them into 2 categories in looking at this document. One is the primary stakeholders, which is BIA, so the Navajo region, the Eastern Navajo Agency. BLM would be their state office and the Farmington Field office. The Navajo Nation, of course, the executive office, the council, DNR, and land board are the primary stakeholders for the Navajo Nation. We've also been having questions and inquiries from Eastern Navajo Land Commission, and we did present to that commission on this topic. We certainly other primary stakeholders is Navajo permittees and Navajo allottees situated within Eastern Navajo Agency. The secondary stakeholders include Navajo tribal ranch leaseholders, because there's several Navajo tribal ranches within Eastern, as everybody is aware. Certainly the Navajo Nation chapters across Eastern, oil and gas companies that have leases within the area. We also know that Navajo relocation land selection that had happened because of the settlement, the Navajo Hopi settlement, and relocatees that might have moved out to Eastern Agency area. Then you have NIP being located in just south of Farmington there / Nappy. Recently, there's been several, I think, discussions with at least BLM BIA doing the RMP where we have Chaco protection organizations that have voiced their concerns around Chaco and protecting the historic and cultural properties. So this is just a summary of some of that we feel like the stakeholders in terms of the MOU that we'll be talking about today. Moving on to slide 5, I'm going to go ahead and have Mr. DeGroat go ahead and speak to the next two slides. Mr. DeGroat, have you been able to unmute yourself? I know you've been trying to unmute from your side.
Mr. DeGroat, you have the floor.
Star 6.
Star 6, Mr. DeGroat. While he's working on that, let me go ahead and continue, Mr. Chair. So I think some of the understanding from a historical perspective is really helpful in how these documents have evolved through history. And so I brought my team together. We did some brainstorming and discussion on what were some of those key concerns during the time back in the 40s and possibly in the 50s that really drove the development of the documents. So here's a summary of what we came down and looking at some key concerns and issues from the past. The Navajo Nation at the time were really looking at civil and criminal jurisdiction. And so they were looking at the different jurisdiction within Eastern Agency and certainly for Big Navajo too. They also were looking at land consolidation for Eastern Navajo Agency. And I believe everyone is aware that the Navajo Nation Council developed a land consolidation plan that was passed formally by the council. I think that the Navajo Nation also were very concerned about how livestock was being managed within the different areas of Eastern Agency, and families were providing concern that certainly livestock is a livelihood that they have in terms of Eastern families out there. Some of the areas that BLM had concerns was about trespass. Again, you had mixed land status in the area, and there was also concerns on what BLM, I believe, perceived as Navajo families residing on public domain lands. BLM also were working on special management areas as well as reviewing land patterns within the Northwest New Mexico area. There was also significant concerns on mineral development during that time. Coal, gas, uranium, sand, and gravel was happening. So there had to be a more formalized way beyond the regulatory use that the coordination and cooperation between the different stakeholders, i.e. Navajo Nation and BIA. I think even back then there were some concerns being brought out about feral horses. From the BIA side, concerns and part of the work that we're doing certainly is grazing permits and addressing how grazing permits will be issued on different land status that BIA had oversight on, or working with the Navajo Nation, such as tribal trust land, and certainly allotted lands as well. There were some concerns, I think, at the time. I know Superintendent Stature as well as Mr. Plummer, Superintendent Plummer, were looking at different land status situations, including executive orders, and you can certainly read there some of the information there. Slide 6 is really just a summary, a quick snapshot of what I just discussed right now. Let's move on to number 7, slide number 7. I think everyone's aware, or most of us is aware, that there are over about 3,000 individual Indian allotments in Eastern Navajo Agency. So from a historical perspective, there were discussions happening about how some of those allotments were selected. And then there was oil and gas impact to some of those lands that were chosen by Navajos, especially in the Star Lake area. So Navajos had to choose other land once oil was discovered. There's a lot of historical situation and information there. In some cases, homesteads, which are usually 640 acres, were either canceled or denied as part of the allotment selection. And then there was a formal way that allotments were identified. For those allotments of public domain lands. They use the BLM public domain application process, and one of the requirements was to make improvements once the selection were made within 2 years. And if those improvements were not made, then the allotment would be canceled. And you still hear today some of our grandparents talking about some of the lands that were canceled on them based on their own family legacy. From the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Indian allotment agents were assigned to make allotments to Indians using an allotment book, and this one happened around 1886 to 1912. Gosh, I wish Mr. DeGroat was on the line, but nonetheless, that's a summary of some of the information that we have in terms of a historical perspective.
Mr. Sophie, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. DeGroat, I don't know if you, great, thank you. I just went over the historic piece. I don't know if you want to add any emphasis or details to it now.
Mr. DeGroat, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm having trouble trying to get into the meeting. So anyway, the actual number of allotments were 4,000. Approximately 2,000 were made under what Mr. Sosi described as the Indian allotment. Those allotments were made while the 709 reservation was still in existence. Called a reservation, but I don't allotment no. After the president got pressure from non-Indians to do away with the reservation, he rescinded the 709 land withdrawal. Any lands that were not allotted will return to public domain status. Mr. Statcher, auto irrigation, he worked with the Navajo families, and they made application under the public domain allotments. As Mr. Sosa explained, there's two different types of processes. The original Indian allotment, 8 or Nashadent or Italiado, Nasos, we had it Washington earlier. 8 over Latin, Arab and Nashaya, Nasos, a take is a study clinic, but me. Public domain allotment, clean a lot of that is the BLM. A said hard that the leg at all applications area. Other area, but has any for low in Nashita no. Nakinaka, but yes, it didn't. 80 improvement in energy and it all how one low. That energy even as you work out Facebook with area Nakinaka and had it adolescent. A quarter sago area the public domain I mean Happy dapat ni ako ikan kanado da iska da do I see balagana to that it open na o hot zada ya pada da liado out of it area and that in open na kinaka je ta wish is the application ya do but in that is ako it is single ya sada so da no chikia o bit at begin this so da no ya that ako the job so spend or their application agency but in that is so it takes the child out of the class near the even manager at the that did rather that's it, Mr. Sosi.
Certainly appreciate that, Mr. DeGroat, and we value his historical knowledge and expertise. Continuing on, Mr. Chair, let's move to slide number 8. As we looked at the documents, and then based on RDC's agenda, we saw in there the need to discuss some of the general principles on why would such a document be developed. And so based on the information that we looked at and other research that we've done, here are some of the general principles that we were able to bring together, so that I think that kind of lays the groundwork on why BIA and BLM initially came together to develop an understanding document, which is called the MOU. So the first one there on slide 8 is that the MOU will address historical issues or concerns on mixed land status, work with different federal agencies' missions, and accommodate tribal communities within multiple jurisdictions. The next one is there. The MOU would be based on tribal codes and laws and federal regulatory oversight. The MOU would define roles and responsibilities to be agreed upon by the 3 parties. This is certainly when the Navajo Nation also was invited to join on the MOU. The MOU would address any new issues that might come up, and then it would allow for the appropriate entity to mitigate that issue. The MOU would identify responsibilities in managing grazing permits on allotted lands. As we just briefly discussed on allotted lands, that was certainly a significant concern on BIA's side in working with BLM and the Navajo Nation. The MOU would define Indian grazing communities and BLM grazing allotments that fall under BIA and BLM for Districts 16, 19, and 20. These are just some of the review that we've done in analyzing what we feel would be the general principles used. There might be others, and certainly we're open to those discussions, and we can add it to this training document for future use. Next, I want to move to slide 9. You'll see slide 9, 10, and 11 all being kind of very good detailed information on the development of the MOU. And I would like to ask Effie Delmar to speak to those 3 slides and hit those highlights and key points. Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Sosi.
Ms. Delmar, are you on the line?
Press *6 to unmute. Ms. Effie Delmar.
Yes, good morning.
You may proceed.
Yes, as far as slide 9, it basically just gives you a general outline of the different MOUs or cooperative agreements from 1949 to 2003. It basically just provides the title of each document and when they were signed by the 2 or 3 parties involved in those agreements. And all of them relate to grazing management or grazing administration and range management. Slide 10 and slide 11 refer to, it lists the different agreements for those years, 1949 to 2003, and each row it provides the highlights. Like the 1949 was between the BLM and the BIA. It also mentions the New Mexico District 7, which includes the Eastern Navajo Agency, the checkerboard area. So from 1949 to 1963 and 1965, in 1965, the Navajo Nation became part of the agreement, basically because in 1963, they were tasked with establishing a code, a Navajo Nation code to address grazing. So in 1963, the off-reservation code was established. So the Navajo Nation became part of that agreement. in 1965, going forward to today's 2003 agreement, which is still in effect. In 1978, that agreement relates to land transfers, also the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, and that particular act is for the federal lands, like the public domain lands, the lands administered under the Forest Service. So that act was for those lands, but because it's listed there, it's because the Tele Grazing Act, it was initially the first act that was applied on the Navajo or any tribal land. That Tele Grazing Act was applied, and of course, when the Navajo Nation or the federal code was put in place, like the 25 CFR 166 and 167, when those were established, the Tele Grazing Act was lifted for the tribal lands. In that 1978 agreement, it also mentions the Navajo Indian Irrigation Project. And as I think we all know, that project was established in about 1964. So as you can see, in 1978, the Navajo Nation Land Code, CMY-33-69, so in 1994, the Cooperative Agreement replaced the original 1965 MOU, and it specifically defined the different roles of the different parties, signatory parties of that agreement. And also it specifically identified who would administer the grazing permits, or administer the grazing of the different parties, like the BLM and basically the BIA. Although the code was established by the tribe, but the responsibility of the BIA was still to administer the grazing permits, and then the range management for the different grazing communities identified under the agreement. So today, based on that, that's still administered by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the grazing permits in Eastern Navajo Agency, and any thing in relation to range management.
Is that everything you want to present, Ms. Delmore, on that side? Okay. So, Mr. Chair, you'll see in those detailed information, certainly the committee can continue to review the details of that. But let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, which is slide 12. And we developed this kind of a graphic timeline. So in a quick one-slide presentation, you can really look at the changes that happen on the MOU. You'll see the dates on top, and then the boxes on the bottom really says, like, for example, September 3rd, 1949 established the MOU between BIA and BLM. And on February 8th, 1965, that's when the Navajo Nation joined the agreement. And you also see a line, demarcation line there. BIA and BLM worked on addressing historical issues up to about 1965. Then they invited the Navajo Nation to continue to assist in addressing those issues. So we just want a quick snapshot of the document's evolution in terms of the timeline. If you look at slide 13, the land exchanges have happened in the past and probably will continue going forward, depending on the Navajo Nation's own policy and looking at land consolidation in Eastern Navajo Agency. Slide 14 summarizes the key responsibilities of the three entities. And certainly from BIA, we issue grazing permits on tribal trusts and allotted lands. We invoice permittees on the use of range units. We analyze and evaluate carrying capacities. We also look at compliance issues, complete appraisal on grazing rental rates. We do that every 10 years. And the next one that's upcoming is 2024. So we're starting to vamp up for doing the strategic timelines and all that type of work that we're doing internally for the next one we're going to do 2024. We also negotiate with the Navajo Nation on the final grazing rental rates on tribal trusts. BIA, we also administer directly the graze for allotted lands, the grazing permits there under a program called Authority to Grant program that we have. We approve conservation plan, address noxious weeds, and ensure NEPA compliance. You'll also read there below BLM and Navajo Nation responsibilities. They can certainly speak to that in this meeting. Now, the question that the chair that you mentioned, that you stated at the beginning is there some modification that needs to happen? And I think here at the Eastern Agency and working with the Navajo region, here are some of the, we feel the necessary improvements that probably need to be addressed going forward. I think that we need to address some of the allotted land concerns within the BLM grazing allotments. We'll certainly have to work closely with BLM to work through those concerns. BIA at this time does all the invoicing and data management for all the grazing permits, even in the different land status. We would like to look at reassigning some of that administrative work for invoicing and data management to each entity. The BLM would invoice for their own areas, and the BIA will be doing that too. There's also some Navajo Nation concerns being raised, especially by the land board, and certainly we can integrate those concerns going forward. Another area that I think that needs to, as part of this training, as well as others, I think that needs to happen is really encouraging the different entities on the Navajo side to have a unified understanding on regulatory authorization, roles and responsibilities, because sometimes, depending on different meetings, you have a different take on it or different understanding on the MOU. Another area where I think we need to look at is addressing current situational factors for land management. For example, BIA and BLM are working closely together on the BLM Resource Management Plan Amendment. I think we need to take that type of planning document into consideration for this MOU. Then separating out non-grazing and grazing issues. If there's concerns on land tenure issues that are non-grazing, maybe there's a way to develop a different agreement on that. I know the Navajo Nation is working with the Land Commission on Nelly effort. Continuing on the modification, what might be some of the options that are available for the three entities? Any one of those, maybe we can relook at opt out of the agreement and have each entity manage their own grazing permits using tribal laws and federal regulations where appropriate. Maybe another option is reestablish a totally new agreement from step one and establish provisions to address current issues and current jurisdictional concerns that might be out there, or leave the MOU as is with the shortcomings and issues. And next might be to amend the 2003 agreement to adjust to today's conditions, statutes, and address current concerns. Some things to keep in mind is some of the ongoing factors. Navajo Nation is working on the Nelly effort to consolidate the lands of the Eastern Navajo Agency. As mentioned earlier, there's changing conditions with the Eastern Navajo Agency. There's ongoing possible land exchanges. Then there's there's some Chaco Protection Buffer Zone that's looked at in certainly on BLM site for the Chaco National Historical Park. Then Navajo has about 400,000 acres of fee lands that they want to look at and possibly move that towards trust status. And what might be some of the next steps? Certainly for BIA, we'll probably work with our solicitor's office on some of the recommendations we have, and have each party meet internally to identify changes, call for a new tri-party meeting, finalize changes or develop a new agreement, then have leadership review and sign off on the agreement. So that is in a synopsis of the MOU on Mr. Chair, and we're open for discussions, questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sosi. Shananta, honorable members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions on the presentation A?
Chairman.
Honorable Freeland.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Sosi, thank you for that update and that history, that perspective. Yeah, it's a very interesting lesson and education. Just historically how this all evolved and came about. I don't know if we could get Mr. Rogers on the line. I would like for him to listen in too. I don't know if he's on the line, but I think he should also be a part of just listening on this discussion, Chairman, as a part of the Eastern Land Commission. He's the executive director. I forgot to ask for him to be included, but if there's a way we can also have him included as well, Chairman. But Edia, thank you.
Honorable Freeland, do you have his contact number, Mr. Rogers?
Yeah.
If you do, just text it to Mr. Tahi or Ms. Begay. Perhaps they will email him or call him and for him to get on the call.
Okay.
Thank
I'll
you.
do it to Tahi right now. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Yeah. Honorable members of RDC, any other comments or questions?
Chennai, Chairman.
Go ahead, Honorable Stewart.
Oh, no, Chennai. So, Chennai, Mr. Honorable Doug Freeland, Mr. Sosi, your staff, present Dahlagi, and the board members too for the Eastern Navajo Agency Land Board. In looking at and listening to the presentation this morning, I also want to ask, this agreement and to read and the agreement from 2003, and going off the original one in not original, but the one back in 65, I know that there was some documents that were presented and also asked to be looked at as well. At one time, I know that there was also a meeting held in 2006, and to this point, no other meeting has been held since then regarding that agreement and the wanting of the agreement to be put back in place with the examples of the cooperative agreement instead of saying it be a tri-party, and also looking at different areas wording and whatnot to be put back in place. And so I wanted to see if BIA has that document as well. I know that there was some write-ups on it, like notations on the side. And I want to see if BIA had that. Maybe we could look at that too, since there is the opportunity to amend that agreement as well. And I know that this is, like you all have stated, a very difficult area. Even Shana, Delegate Freeland says that because of the different land statuses out there in Eastern, how can we come together to work this out for the benefit of the board and the nation and BIA as well, to see what we can do through this presentation, the timelines that have been given, the examples that have been given as well. That's what I wanted to ask Shana.
Thank you, Honorable Stewart. Let me go back to Mr. Sosi.
Mr. Chair, we certainly can continue to provide the other information. This was really just a presentation summarizing at a high level the information that we felt for this work session. But we do have other documents that we can bring together and provide that to the committee if the committee requests that, if they want that.
Thank you. Honorable Stewart, do you have a follow-up question?
Not right now, Shana, just to keep that gate open for me.
Okay, thank you. Honorable members of RDC, any other comments or questions for Mr. Sosi and his staff? If not,
Chairman Freeland.
Go ahead.
Chairman, thank you. I just want to make a comment. I appreciate Mr. Sosi's doing this presentation, but I also appreciate Mr. DeGroat getting on the line. Mr. DeGroat is a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate him providing his perspective. I always learn something from him every time he speaks, and I just want to say thank you to Mr. DeGroat for getting on the line. So, Eddie, Chairman, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Sosi, on your presentation number 15, page 15 and 16 there, the need for modification, those modifications that you are recommending to RDC that we will probably have Honorable Freeland consider as a legislation. So these are the modifications from BIA, right?
Honorable Chair, yes, we can certainly look at it in more detail if the committee wants us to provide some examples or other details.
Okay, thank you, because we will keep that in mind as to what amendments will be coming forth, and perhaps we will have that follow-up meeting, and at that time we will really solidify after we hear from BLM as well as from the Navajo Nation's Eastern Land Board as well. Honorable Freeland?
Chairman, thank you. Staff, I just wanted to say I appreciate that because I am hopeful that BLM and the nation will be in agreement to these recommendations that BIA is putting forth, as well as our land boards. If our land boards are amenable to this agreement, what's been presented, if they're okay with it too, I want to make sure our land boards their perspective is also taken in consideration as well. So, Eddie, Chairman, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Tahi, Ms. Begay, has this PowerPoint presentation been sent to the Eastern Land Board? Mr. Sosi, perhaps you could answer that question too.
Chairman.
Yes.
Chairman, Delegate Freeland, I'm sorry. I did send it out to the Joint Land Board executive officers, Mr. Enrico and Ms. Violet Nelson. So they will be sending it out to the Joint Land Board of members. I don't have all their emails, but they'll forward it on to them. So I just wanted to let you know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That way they can look at the presentation and perhaps have their own meeting at Eastern Land Board meeting and discuss these modifications that are being recommended by BIA, and perhaps they need to establish their own modification to this Memorandum of Understanding, the agreement that is in place. So thank you. Any other comments or questions? None. None. We'll go to B on presentation. Overview of Cooperative Agreement, Administration Objectives, Conditions of Transfer of Grazing Administration Duties, General Principles and Responsibilities, and Specific Responsibilities. Back to you, Mr. Sosi, and then we'll also give time to Mr. Leo Watchman. So, Mr. Sosi.
Mr. Chair, I thank you again, and thank you to the committee members. As I was mentioning earlier, we did include the 2 slides, the general responsibilities and the principles within the presentation that we just went over. But certainly we can provide more details if there's any specific questions. But I would like to just go ahead and defer to Navajo Nation, Division of Natural Resources to make their presentation first.
Thank you, Mr. Sosi. Mr. Watchman, you have the floor, sir.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, the members of the Resource Committee, other delegates that may be on the line, staff and so forth, participation on this call. I just listened to an overview and move into what the agenda states there. I just want to go back on maybe a couple of things that leads into my my response, or input from the natural resources under the Department of Agriculture. Historically, the Tri-Party or the Memorandum Agreement or the Cooperative Agreement, they sort of intermingle on responsibilities, and over the years they've been interpreted, or maybe in some cases been misinterpreted, in overall use. Maybe use would be maybe the use of the grazing fees that are collected, or even use of authority when it comes to feral horses or even land statuses. Mr. Chair, in reference to, the working relationship the nations had, ongoing have been trying to clarify the various grazing communities by district or in an efforts of compliance. I think that was the overall goal listed on any of these agreements that were either in place or proposed. Back in 2011, there was an initiative, and probably the more recent initiatives moving forward. I can't really speak to the ones in the 40s or 60s or 70s or even the 90s, seeing that there had been changes to some of the authorities or responsibilities of these lands. But in 2011, the Bureau, as well as BLM and the nation, got together and were reaffirming or citing the Memorandum Agreement. One of the things that came about is use of funds that was being collected. So in 2011, there was an agreement or partial agreement to establishing a fund management plan. And under that, there was a legal review on the nation side, as well as the Bureau, on setting up such a fund. This pretty much enables some management tools, and referencing the ARMA, the act in which Congress passed in the 90s, basically following that format, developing plans under the ARMA criteria, and basically that would need monies. Over those years, we were presented a lot of range studies, range inventory, and I think the Bureau's focus was trying to gain understanding of the range and also the land status and various concerns over any plan or any form of management would have to have direct inventory. So moving forward in 2011, there was some agreements that were several meetings were held and docs that were created, but unfortunately it was never enacted. We never got a fund management plan, and to this day, that fund management plan has an escrow account that has built up a significant amount. So that's probably one of the main reasons for concerns as we talk about this morning. The memorandum agreement basically cited a few things: land statuses, as well as responsibilities and grazing fee, as well as some concerns that were on the ground, like horse and I guess feral horse roundups. I guess roundups would be the case. Also, more recently, probably within the past 5 years, fracking. Fracking became an issue, as well as I think it was mentioned earlier about some of the Chaco Canyon and concerns over use or access to other activities. Moving forward, in reference to what is being stated regarding the grazing fees, what we said, most of the Eastern Land Board, want autonomy toward that responsibility. However, we don't have the capacity. It kind of intermingles back to the fees. The only fees that are out there that haven't been designated, that we would set aside 10% for administrative costs and primarily use the rest of the funds for, I guess it would be conservation practices. I think the term of tri-state agreement is involving the NRCS, the Navajo Nation, BIA, on basically the cooperative agreement, or that tri-state agreement was put together to maintain any kind of project moving forward and use of these funds. So there's probably about 3 different elements that kind of intermingle to a base agreement. And I mentioned that because it's sort of confusing. We did jump over some items in which the base agreement does touch upon, but we kind of skipped over and talked about fees, and we're talking about other things, including the grazing, administrating the grazing. In 07, the Navajo Nation had several hearings, or 012 had several hearings, and was proposing a what they call was a NIRA, which was a Range Improvement Act, which would encompass taking over the grazing administration or responsibility of issuing permits. That also did not pass the Navajo Nation Council, the RDC, or move to the council. So there have been 2 different objectives or initiatives started by Department of Ag and Eastern Land Board to try to look at managing, and it does somewhat answer the question of grazing administration. At this point, there's been 2 legislations that have been pushed forward or attempted to be legislated, did not pass. Base questions were the use of the funds when it came to these fees, also responsibilities, and who would pay for certain, I guess, extraordinary situations, say like horse roundups, or say fence repair, these kind of things that are not within the districts that which Eastern Land Board has. There's also some tribal lands or Navajo Nation lands that are encompassed a part of the Eastern Land Board's responsibility, as well as BIA. The other, I guess, the point in which moving forward in terms of coming together, there's another date we had in 2016. We did move a agreement pushed through the Bureau as well as the Navajo Nation, and it went to the BLM. That the agreement basically sort of captured the grazing communities, clarified them because of different land statuses. unfortunately, BLM didn't sign that. So it kind of pushes us back to, I guess, square one. Probably the best opportunity now is there's different times right now. There's been pressures from, private sector when it came to, at that time, fracking was not really present, and then right after that became really present. It sort of slowed down, so that was interrupt some of the, I guess, the decisions made and public outcry in reference to how strengthful is our agreement when it comes to, what they felt is the trespassing. And moving forward, the other thing is, in Eastern Navajo, even though we're talking management of land and livestock, there was reference, and I think I did speak to the resource committee at one time, in stating that there's a serious trespass issue, not only feral horses, but non-permit producers. It does conflict to any kind of agreement because we're entering into this agreement as a Navajo Nation, but we don't have compliance. So it kind of leaves us with, a foot out the door and foot in the door when we don't have fully control over those production of livestock or encroachment or fencing. So that's going to be down the road, and even the agreement sort of been or in the past has been our hang up. We couldn't enforce, and I'm not sure if we're in the position to be entering into another agreement where historically that's been sort of our downfall. And more recently, as we heard testimony regarding $4 million for distribution, it's a direct, I guess, how would you say, conflict when you have money going out to producers, but yet this agreement says permit holder. And so you're kind of conflicting, uses of funds, as well as the fees. The fees are for permit holders paying into a fund. It's not for producers, is how I read it. So as we move forward, Mr. Chair, I guess those are some of the current concerns we're probably going to have to weed out and see if we can find other funds for other use, or other funds for use for producers that are not under the roles of the BLM or BIA or the Navajo Nation. Lastly, the agreement, yes, it needs to be in place. There is concerns over jurisdiction when it comes to horse roundups. Right now, the BLM does allow, in some cases, hopefully this doesn't continues, is that they do allow roundups, and they basically utilize the Navajo Nation seizure law to round up, and even though it may be on BLM, but right adjacent would be Navajo Nation property in many cases. So those are some of the concerns moving forward, and maybe there might be a direction taken that separate agreements could be placed. I do like the definition of livestock and then non-livestock, because there are a wealth of other concerns regarding and the land statuses out there. Aforementioned Nelly is one that the Eastern Land Board does have to contend with because it impacts folks, but yet that's kind of not, it's really not their responsibility from the nation standpoint, but yet they're being forced to maybe respond or react. So, Mr. Chair, in reference to the any concerns we may have over transfer, I think it's really budget related. We need to develop a budget to take on that responsibility, or see what kind of joint responsibility. The Eastern Land Board has been wanting a office within the Bureau of within BIA and Crown Point for a number of years, and that's one of the objectives they've had. And again, fully staffing the Eastern Land Administration for grazing would be also something that we need to tackle, Mr. Chair. Hopefully, I sort of gave an understanding to Department of Ag and the Division of Natural Resources position. It's been ongoing for a number of years, and there has been some points in which we have addressed. I think there's a better understanding where the parties are going and what they, would have a common goal. I appreciate the Bureau being on, also BLM, just making reference to some of the challenges we've had in the past. But the Eastern Land Board, we have some new leadership as well, and they want to be more progressive and try to move forward on a step and building on agreements that we can, honor. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Watchman. Honorable members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions for Mr. Watchman?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Freeland.
Honorable Freeland, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Watchman and for that update. Furthermore, as we proceed on to this discussion, the tri-party agreement really focuses on grazing and grazing usage and grazing areas in particular, with perspective to trust land, fee lands, BLM, and allotments. And, our people have been paying grazing fees as well. And I think this is another discussion we could possibly have is, the grazing fees that are paid to the BIA. And I always used to tease Mr. Sosi about him carrying a suitcase with a handcuff on it and, the fees that will be used. At some point, when we get a little bit further into the discussions, those grazing fees that the BIA does have, would like to have those maybe turned back over to our permittees and those who have paid those fees at some point, and look at how can they best utilize those monies, and work with the land boards in those respective areas and respective districts. So I would like to see that happen if that's of course something feasible and amenable to our area in particular, because those grazing fees are collected by the BIA. And I know Mr. Sosi has spoken in the past about those fees are still with the BIA, and we could probably get them back to our people at some point. That would be great. So, Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watchman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, without the discussion in reference to what Delegate Freeland had mentioned, I did sort of state they're kind of intermingled. We're sort of dealing with the same area, Eastern Navajo, and the Eastern Land Board. They do, I guess, like example would be any fees in which are collected, and there are more districts in Eastern Navajo than there are where we collect fees or BIA collects fees. And so that right there needs to be clarified moving forward. I think somewhat has been done, but there's still efforts to utilize the fund for the entire Navajo or Eastern Navajo, meaning moving forward on any kind of EQIP projects through the USDA or any in general direct spending to a permit holder. The flip side, that sort of goes back to the management side that the MOA is trying to create responsibilities, Mr. Chair. So very much open. I think the Eastern Land Board is very much open. I think, again, it goes back to developing a plateau and deciding where we're going to move forward for the next, 5. I think there was the original MOA had a 7-year timeline. Maybe that would be the emphasis of putting a timeline together, and recommending a number of years with some milestones to be reported on, annually, those type of things, and see how we are progressing, or maybe at that point needing to change the MOA. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Watchman. Honorable members of RDC, any other comments or questions? If not, I'll go to Ms. Siako.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Nez, members of RDC. I just had a couple of quick comments and a question. My first question is to the Division of Natural Resources. Currently, it's our understanding that the Fish and Wildlife Department under DNR is currently out within the chapters. They visited a few Eastern Agency chapters requesting supporting resolutions for addressing the drought across the nation. And I know that they've also approached the Joint Land Board as well on this. And so my question is that the Fish and Wildlife Department specifically referenced this tri-party agreement within their implementation of addressing drought. And so my question was, how is Department of Agriculture working with Fish and Wildlife on this tri-party agreement in terms of addressing drought? And then also they mentioned that they really can't proceed, and Gloria and her shop can correct me if I'm wrong, that they really can't proceed until they have this tri-party agreement in place. However, my question to them and to Department of Agriculture is the timeline in which, the drought assessment incorporated to this tri-party agreement process looks like from the department's end and the division. And then my other comment is in regards to the escrow accounts that Delegate Freeland had also just mentioned, that we had an understanding that there is already a draft process in place for addressing the escrow accounts that Mr. Watchman just mentioned, and that they were working with the land board, and that there was a few more steps that needed to take place in order for that draft to become available. As working in collaboration, that this is something that has been ongoing for almost a year. And so I just wanted to ask if Mr. Watchman can also give a timeline on when he sees this draft becoming about, because we did get a presentation to RDC, I believe, from BIA regarding their end of the escrow account process and their recommendations specifically to the criteria, and also other areas in terms of how this fund management plan would be set up within the nation, and other areas as well. So those are my comments and my questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Yako. Mr. Watchman?
The first question, Mr. Chair, members, in reference to Fish and Wildlife and their efforts, to my understanding, Fish and Wildlife, they are working on, I guess it would be climate change, and have been working on within communities and gathering information. In addition to the responsibility, they also have the NEPA responsibility of providing that clearance, and that goes with any type of, I guess, reuse of land, or any, I guess, will be federal action of use of land, like a grazing permit transfer or a building withdrawal, that type of thing. I don't. In reference to what we have done, I believe the Resource Committee redesignated some funds recently to try to increase their capacity, the use of the infrastructure fund. Our reason for wanting that to be utilized is that we have a number of permits that are needing clearance, or needing to be addressed in reference to transfers, or these are grazing permits. That's pretty my understanding in reference to how we are working with Fish and Wildlife. In terms of timeline, that would probably be better answered by them. Other things we're working on is just some of the workshops, and I think they did in the tour. There was a tour sponsored by Fish and Wildlife that RDC, the committee, did attend, and that basically you have that answer on what was seen out there, and also maybe some targets of funds in the future that could be utilized. The Navajo Nation currently has a drought contingency plan. It was developed in, I guess it would be 04, and it does map out what programs, what the responsibilities are. Our purpose our responsibility in that plan is to do inventory as well as look at special sales. We are planning to do that this fall on determining whether we can sponsor some special livestock sales. In addition to that, just providing some supplemental feed. Those are the other things that we are providing. And that was referenced earlier when I said there was $4 million sent out to chapters, and that was somewhat a part of addressing the drought plan, or I guess it would be mediation, Mr. Chair. The second question was reference to the escrow account. In 011, I mentioned in terms of history there, the nation did get together and move to establish a fund management plan. And that was using the old, I guess the existing, in this case, the existing Memorandum of Agreement. That particular fund management plan went back and forth, but at the end, the Bureau basically was saying we needed to have a resolution from or I guess it would be our Eastern Land Board. There was concerns over the use. I think the Eastern Land Board took a position at that time that they wanted to use the funds for, basically at the wishes of their capacity, whereas the fund management plan said only 10% would be utilized for administration. That then rolled over to 016. On 016, we made another attempt, and the attempt was since we didn't feel we needed a fund management plan. There's another concern over when the Navajo Nation accepts money, would there be indirect costs associated to that, or would it just be subject to revenue total to the Navajo Nation? I think the reference used it would just go into the black hole, and we would have to, the Eastern Land permit holder and committee would have to, lobby to regain that back through the budget process. So in 016, the Resource Committee passed the change within agriculture. Agriculture developed an Eastern Land Management Office. Within that, the plan operation allowed us to accept fees from tribal ranches as well as permit holders. Thus, given that avenue of collecting or receiving a fee, and that was basically sent over to the Bureau. The Bureau took the position that they still want a fund management plan, but we're basically saying we have the authorization to accept a fee, which we didn't before, and basically asking the Bureau to send over the proceeds. And then we would then use the Navajo Nation budget process to allocate that back to the Eastern Land Board, Eastern Land permit holder. That exists right now. Currently, there's been the Eastern Land Board has been for that, and they've changed their position, and then now we're awaiting a resolution that says let's move forward, accept these funds. That's the current status. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Watchman. Honorable members of RDC, any other comments or questions? If not,
Mr. Chair, Superintendent Sosi, comment?
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Sosi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to add some more information to the comments being made around the Navajo escrow account. So from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, we have a government-to-government relationship with the Navajo Nation. I think everybody knows that. But for us, we have to properly engage the Navajo Nation and on these different matters that we work on. For example, under the Navajo escrow account, it certainly is the fact that we collect grazing fees and we go through an annual invoicing activity for the use of the land an Eastern Agency on Tribal Trust and allotted lands, as well as government administered lands. So we've been doing that, at least, 30, 40 years now. And part of that type of task was, I think, through the MOU discussions and the implementation. We also see that in our federal regulations on collecting administrative fees as part of the range management that we do. So today we have, let me see, I got the number here. If you look at the information for the Navajo escrow account, we have $973,958. So that's the amount that is sitting in the Navajo escrow account on the federal side. So going back, 5, 6 years, maybe even 7 years, the land board probably more than any other entity raised comments and concerns on the use of the Navajo escrow account and how those funds could go back to the Navajo Nation from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Just as precedence, back in 1999 and 2000, the BIA did transfer, my understanding was about $1 million back to the nation. When that happened, it went into the general budget internally on the tribal side. We certainly will not tell how the nation to do what they need to do internally, and we still stand by that because we have a government-to-government relationship with the Navajo Nation. But more specifically on the escrow account, the fund management plan, we have been engaging with Division of Natural Resources and Land Board going forward, how would those funds go back across to the nation? But on the BIA side, we're doing what is necessary to do that. And certainly at the right time, we'll be working with the tribe, the Navajo Nation, when that transfer can happen. The BIA did back in 2014 and 15 when we had the land board training session in Albuquerque. Then Regional Director Pinto was there to provide guidance. And a question came up around the Navajo escrow account. And so the guidance given to the land board and Navajo Nation was that some type of plan would be needed to partly justify the transfer back to the nation. So that's kind of where we stop in terms of giving guidance on internal work. And it's up to the nation how they do that part. But one of the concerns that, as part of the guidance, was to make sure there's a criteria within that plan so that any permittee in Eastern would have the opportunity to apply for those funds if they felt like they needed support for their own range unit management. So that's been kind of the guidance given to certainly the land board and DNR from that meeting that we had. So going forward, BIA, we're doing what we need to do internally to set up the proper transfer of the funds back to the nation. That's ongoing internally at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sosi. Shanant, honorable members of RDC, do you have any other comments or questions?
Chairman.
If not, I'm going to give some time over to Mr. Jeff Tafoya from BLM after Honorable Freeland. So, Honorable Freeland, go ahead.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Sosi, thank you for that perspective as well. And of course, Ms. Arvizo Siaco for the reminder of the fish and wildlife perspective as well. The escrow account, I really am hopeful that, we talked about this before previously, that escrow account, I hope we can utilize to give back to specifically our permittees and those who have paid into this account, their permit fees. Yeah. And I'm hopeful we can utilize it in that way again. amenable to land board's approval. And, I really appreciate our land boards being on this. And I know they have a lot of perspective to put into place, especially from, learning from past agreements. I think our land boards are ready to take this on right now. And our land boards are on that level, that pedestal to understand fully what needs to be done. And we're going to follow, I like to follow their lead on this agreement, and with, of course, with perspective to Department of Ag as well. I appreciate Mr. Sosi mentioning what that $1 million or how that $1 million was spent. I'm hopeful we don't have to go that route again this time. And I'm hopeful that this money will go back to those who paid into it. And, we need windmills, we need earthen dams, we need things like that. And it's harder to do for us out here because of land. And this tri-party agreement really focuses on grazing. And I'm real hopeful that we can move in that direction. Understandably, just hearing what the BIA and Department of Ag has stated now, very interested to hear what the BLM's perspective is. But Idia, Chairman, just some comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Freeland, for that. Before I move forward to have Mr. Tafoya provide their input from BLM, let me just, for the record, we do have Honorable Delegate Otto So on the call with us, and he's on the call for your information. Honorable So, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, you guys. Otto So in Shia. Otto, na financially don't understand kappa, but she. Toninist is a David Bijma, so I'm on the call and appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Honorable Vice Chair Thomas Walker Jr. Introduce yourself, sir. Honorable Vice Chair Walker. Press star six.
Chairman, yes, Chairman, though, committee members, the colleagues that are on the call, although the presenters also, although the various offices that provide assistance to RDC, Thomas Walker in Czech. None represent Lute, Tulani Lake, Bird Springs, Cameron, coal mine chapters out in Western Navajo Agency. I don't understand the issue. And straight up the patrol and buses chain, tot some is chair that it also the international. I could echo, yeah, Chair.
Thank you. Also, Honorable TL and Begay is on the call with us also. Honorable Begay, could you introduce yourself? Okay, Honorable Daniels.
Chairman, can you hear me? Chairman. Hello?
Honorable Daniels. Yes,
Mr. Chair.
Okay, Honorable Begay, go ahead and introduce yourself, Honorable Begay.
I apologize, I was on mute. Yate, this is PL Begay to Hanawan, he's an instrument on the aid of the other decision. Aro slow, I'm not with a proper strategy. We now get to learn the family of not really and limit on So, this is as I was just listening and
Honorable Begay. Honorable Begay. Honorable Begay, we could barely hear you. Honorable Begay.
Chairman, that concludes my introduction. Thank you.
Okay. Honorable Daniels.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning. Ado kato siya Herman Daniel Sr. Kato ato dan sila ni Betani. Ado Caleb Sini basa siya. O iya clean na siya. Ado that na kayo na ita siya do na Scott Floyd siya na ako. O at nan siya ko na kayo not to on or share to shot to do to be kin ba na siya ko. Ado na ko apologize for calling in late. Mr. Chair, I'm here at Goobings with Navajo Nation Enterprises. They're having a tour on the Goobings property, so I'm with them, and also I was on the line with the Toilet Task Force. So, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Daniels. We'll go ahead and give some time now to BLM. Mr. Tafoya, you have the floor, sir.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. So one, I really appreciate everybody being here and talking about this, and I appreciate Superintendent Sosi's presentation on the history of the MOU. I've been out for about a week and a half, and I don't know if I was trying to get a hold of, so we could kind of participate in the development of this meeting, but kind of feel like we're a little bit behind the curve here. But from BLM standpoint, the MOU can work. I think there's been a lot of effort and time spent on it over the years, over the decades by BLM, BIA, and Navajo Nation and the Land Board. But we all tend to not follow it. Positions change, management changes, elected officials change. The MOU says we would meet every August to discuss the MOU and how it's working and what's going on, and that hasn't happened in a long time. Those are things that we probably ought to make the effort to see happen, so that we don't get to a point where we have new people, new elected officials that don't understand the MOU or how it works or what applies. So I would encourage that we as a group resurrect that back and keep that going and make those meetings happen. From BLM standpoint, a lot of it is around sustainability and land health. And I think therein lies where BLM is kind of in the MOU, given that role of working on range improvements with both BIA and Navajo Nation and the Land Board and the permittees. And this has been an issue for years, in that we can work with permittees and BIA to do fencing, water development, brush treatment, range restoration. A lot of the times, though, we need that partnership. We need, good planning efforts. We need good communication, permittees involvement. And sometimes it seems that's where it lacks. In terms of brush treatment and range restoration, BLM made a really big effort in 2008 to do a lot of brush treatment. But with the agreement with the Land Board and the chapters that, they were going to make an effort to keep the trespassed livestock, the horses, off of those treatments. And in some places it worked, and in some places it didn't. In some places it drew the trespassed livestock, and the money that was spent on all of those improvements wasn't really fully realized because of that trespass grazing. And so, in 2006, when we were talking about reviewing and revising the MOU and going through it in numerous meetings with the Land Board and the agencies, I do remember one decision that we made at that time was that BLM cannot solely resolve the trespass issue across the multiple jurisdictional lines that we have out there. And, we made some really good progress and did some really good work with everybody in 2012, 13, kind of in that time frame, 2011, coordinating roundups, coordinating the removal of those trespass, feral horses. And yet, the conditions change out there, right? The New Mexico Livestock Board getting sued over horses and impoundments, and BLM being kind of threatened with that same issue, and then not having places to take those horses once they're caught. So, BLM is here. We're wanting to work on these key issues. Some of the issues that have been brought up as far as needing modification. I'd like to have more conversations with everybody to fully understand where the BIA and the land board's coming from as I go forward and trying to figure out how to address or change or leave it alone. But, it's just going to take more meeting and more discussion. And that's about it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Tafoya, for your presentation, your concerns that you addressed here before the Resource and Development Committee. And I'm glad that you brought up the fact that Eastern Land Board, as well as BLM and BIA, we're supposed to meet every August, and that hasn't happened in a long time. And perhaps this meeting from today would revitalize some of these meetings where information is shared and duties and responsibilities are back in order. And perhaps like BIA has done, Mr. Tafoya, they have some modification to these agreement. So if you would perhaps write up some modification from BLM to Resources and Development Committee, and we have an advisor, Mr. Rodney Tahi, that you can email, and we can also distribute this to BIA as well as Eastern Navajo Land Board for their review, and what modifications that are before us from BIA will most likely be sent to you as well for your review. And we just look forward to having all three tri-parties come back together and start implementing what needs to get done to better their rangeland among the different land statuses at Eastern Navajo Agency. So, Mr. Tafoya?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll do that. We can work on that, and we'll send Mr. Tahi something, and then we'll look forward to getting some more detail, I guess, on some of the other issues, modifications, so that we can have those discussions. Thank you.
Mr. Tafoya, do you have the contact information for Mr. Tahi?
I'm on the group email that was sent out on this invite. I don't know if he's on that one or not.
Okay, that would be good. So just respond to that in writing as well, your modification to the agreements. Thank you, Mr. Tafoya.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Honorable members of RDC, any comments or questions for Mr. Tafoya?
Chairman.
I hear. Okay, Honorable Freeland.
Freeland, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Colleagues and staff and land board officials and Mr. Tafoya and the BLM, thank you for that. Short and sweet and straight to the point. Definitely appreciate that, and you bringing up the agreement and what had reference as far as every August. I think that's something with the new leadership and new land board. I'm sure that they could probably agree to, but as well as agreeing to modifications and updating the tri-party agreement. And I'm sure that we can come to an understanding. And I really want our land boards to be a part of this effort. And I almost want to say taking the lead on it, but they're the ones who work directly with our permittees, and they're the ones who are out here on the ground working with these issues firsthand. And I think as they need to have the involvement as much as everyone else, because I really want them to become more empowered on this situation and this effort. So, Chairman, thank you.
Okay, certainly appreciate your comment there as far as having to have the permittees and allottees be more involved in this agreement. So, Honorable Stewart.
Shana, Chairman Nez, Otto, Shana, Mr. Delegate Freeland, Otto, Shana, Kettle, those Yajato, Shamayaja, Ket, Otto, and Dakon, Mr. Foya, Otto, and Dakon, this, Mr. Sosi, and I thought the comments made thus far, Shana, I agree with what your statement was, to have more involvement and to start building those collaborations again now between the Eastern Land Board, BIA, and BLM, as well as Navajo Nation, and to continue those efforts and those talks to get this agreement. What is our timeline? This agreement we already know expired. So how can we go ahead and revitalize it or get it to where it needs to be for all parties involved? We've done this before with other entities as well, Shanako. I think if we assist Shana, Delegate Freeland with this and work with the Eastern Land Board and also the other parties involved, we can go ahead and resolve a lot of these issues with this agreement, whether it be tri-party or cooperative agreement, however the wording is going to work in that detail. I think we have all the parties here, and the comments made by Mr. Watchman to assist in this area and what he and also the land board have been working on, what amendments they wanted to present as well. So I think if we continue in those efforts like that, I think it would work to continue to meet too as well, or put them on our agenda every so often to see how far they've come along and what needs to be done. I'll put down in this case, Shania, Chairman, thank you.
Thank you for your comment there, Honorable Stewart. This really is monumental in a sense that we are bringing the three parties, organizations together, Eastern Land Board, BLM, and BIA, and now they have a focus to look forward to and to develop, and perhaps Honorable Freeland will have a legislation to have come before us for our approval after all the meetings that they would like to have to make things better for their agreement. So Honorable Freeland and Honorable Stewart, any other comments or questions? None? Thank you. Let's move down to C. Does the cooperative agreement effectively work for the Eastern Navajo Land Board in working with the grazing permittees, and any recommendations for modifications to existing cooperative agreement? Presenters will be from the Eastern Navajo Land Board. The president will be Herbert Enrico and Mr. Anthony Begay. So Mr. Enrico, you have the floor. Mr. Enrico. Mr. Anthony Begay. Press *6 to unmute. *6
Good
to
afternoon.
unmute.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, Krishna Yate. My name is Anthony Begay, chairperson for District 16, land board members for Eastern Navajo Agency. And this is not the only buses change. The shade is Philippines national. Aro, I can't get to see so this meeting has been long drawn out. I remember we've been requesting this meeting for a very long time, and I'm glad this meeting has occurred. We've been wanting to have a meeting on this issue for a few months. We worked hard and diligently to provide as much information to the RDC staff, to anyone involved in this, and I'm glad that everyone's here and present with us. The main thing is we're doing this for the permittees. The permittees out here in the Eastern are facing a lot of issues with either the drought or trespassers. There's a lot of things that do relate back to this. and it all involves the Memorandum of Understanding. Now, I'm glad the BIA did bring this up. It's actually referred to as the Cooperative Agreement, not the Tri-Party. So the Tri-Party, as you know, and I sent this information to RDC staff, is the Tri-Party relates to land exchanges. It really doesn't do anything, has nothing to do with grazing. The Memorandum of Understanding Cooperative Agreement relates back to grazing, and that's where we become involved as land board members. And the agreement between the Bureau of Land Management and the BIA. And we, as far as that stands, we did have numerous meetings on this Memorandum of Understanding, the Cooperative Agreement. We actually had one last night at 8 p.m. where we all called in and made sure that we understood that we want to go ahead and pick up the original 2003 versions with slight corrections, and we did have a few questions on it that will have to go through the SAS process. Most importantly is on page 4 of that agreement, in letter C, it reads, Navajo Nation BIA, BLM shall continue working through a tri-party. We would like to go ahead and change that to cooperative agreement, as the BLM always uses that in agreements with the Indian tribes across the United States. So with that being said, the permittees are again facing a lot of issues with the trespassers, namely the non-permittees. You know, as the Tele Grazing Act, CFR 25 CFR 166, 167, and also the Off-Reservation Grazing Code states of the Navajo Nation states that anyone that is supposed to be grazing is supposed to have a permit. And those permittees are the ones that abide by all the rules and regulations that are set before them. And they must comply to keep their grazing permit. So we as land boards try as hard as we can to make sure they keep their permits in compliance. Taking tally counts, making sure we meet with them, and if they need to adjust their livestock, especially in this drought, addressing any permittees that are facing other individuals that have livestock in their areas. You know, we always go over there. So we're at the forefront of this agreement. We're the ones that actually make the first contact, and we initiate everything else from there, you know, through written enforcement. So that is the support we need out there. And by support, I'm meaning that BIA does need to furnish up-to-date information to us regarding permits, permit numbers, contact information, maps that detail the topographical locations, because there's a lot of disputes out here in Eastern that regarding to allotted lands, trust lands, fee lands, BLM lands, state lands, executive land orders, housing withdrawals. I could go on and on about that. But, so remaining to that topic here, the trespassers do need to be brought before the land boards, as we always do. We did meet with the resource enforcement offices back on August 11th of this year at Fire Rock, and we introduced ourselves to the Navajo Rangers, Navajo Nation Police Department, the Reno Police Department, the Animal Control, and also the Forestry Department. And we wanted to make sure that we understood one another when it came to enforcement, which party had the knowledge of how to handle certain situations. And that was a beneficial meeting. It was a collaborative meeting. We did notify the Resource and Development Committee staff and also the Law and Order Committee staff to forward the information to them to see if they could attend. But we are again proactive, land board, especially District 16, in regards to initiating a lot of these past issues and reviving them. And the Memorandum of Understanding is the main one. That is our working document that we rely on. And again, going back to feral horses, in there in the Memorandum of Understanding, it states that the BLM shall work with the BIA and the Navajo Nation in regards to addressing these. I know that BLM and the BIA have trust responsibilities to the Navajo Nation, and we want to take full advantage of that in their services and funding to provide these services to our permittees. The permittees do pay a fee, And it is concerning that it is just, concerning to us that we heard about the $1 million that was appropriated back to the Navajo Nation back in 1999 or 2000. And we were unknown. We want to know how it actually was spent too as well. So regarding the escrow account, we did ask for a audit to be done on the escrow funds and the administrative fees to make sure that, we know how it was spent, the actual amount before it's actually received back to the Navajo Nation. So those are the things that we've been working on, focusing on as well. The Bureau of Land Management side, it's good to hear Mr. Tafoya online, and we finally made contact after a few missed calls or phone calls to his office. But we do have a lot of concerns in the Naizi and Herpino area of the oil and gas industries trespassing onto lands that are not actually leased to them. Gates are being opened for access to roads that should not be, tree cutting as well. And again, the feral land horses, we need to come back together and work on that. And that is the purpose of this meeting, is to do a follow-up meeting and present our side of the Memorandum of Understanding amendments. And again, we want to focus on the current Memorandum of Understanding, where we just want to make a few slight modifications and proceed with that. I know there was a lot of versions that are actually like two different versions I've seen, 2010 and 2014 version of the draft, but that was signed by the Navajo Nation and the Bureau, to my knowledge. But we need to look at that and see how we can proceed and maybe include that into ours. But it is an honor to come before you guys and finally address these issues for the Eastern Navajo Land Board. We're mainly out here on our own, land board members. We don't have a supporting staff. We don't have any offices. It's really hard to work with the chapters. Chapters closed to us. We don't have the support as they should give us, mainly because of the COVID-19. They really need to make some room for us, and that's one of the problems we're having out here, is a place to meet, where to get information from. And we do get no really information from Department of Agriculture as far as a lot of these meetings, budgets, support just with computers or anything of that sort. And we're going to be working on that. Even though we run into these hurdles, we're still moving, pressing on, and making sure we get the full benefit of the permits to our permittees.
Very good.
So moving forward with that, we'd like to get a little bit more information on the collection fees and where it goes, and that's where it goes back to the audit as far as it goes to the people. So, thank you, that'll be all.
Thank you for that, Mr. Begay. If you would also send us your modifications as to what the Eastern Navajo Land Board wishes to change on this tri-party agreement, the Memorandum of Understanding, Mr. Begay. Mr. Anthony Begay.
Sir, thank you for that. We did send this to Ferdinand Nota at Department of Agriculture already, but we will provide that to RDC staff as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Begay. Mr. Enrico, are you on the call now?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I tried to unmute myself.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I got back online. Kudo Ashashman, member of RDC committee, and also on behalf of a BIA, BLM Kudo Memorandum of Understanding, and great Nahatat Ahut Ihrado Chipinia endemic be. Arok Arindan Haba Holution and I Bishwa and I received an Nili. Hadahosh, I eat the Zanskago, but Shehilido Kodo, benches in the Hazanagi, open Yahagi, the Yego, Tassel Lahagi, Kodo, and the Ray, Fini, Lons, BLM, Ado, PI, this other door, and then also Jerry Growth in the allotment. The Kodo, a memorandum of understanding, Bahuin, Ingi. Right Nahata about a week and a half ago that Danil Edon that he a Kodosha Ashi went to Department of that and Hade was here, Mr. Ferdinand not touch and then on behalf of Eastern Land Board, you guys can receive some of the copies to RDC members and I 80 hot 8 of the Chicago. A ko kodo sinanta nakini kodo IEC a large in hill machine kit or a follow up meeting at Skinson Aha that she a Nahana Huidok at Dick at it I don't Jordan is chan not Asasioni getting the chat. Got out a memorandum of understanding be at that so it die. How I can negate that Ahanahat Bernard die. Ano Kodoshi Yahate, delicate feeling. He could get the Kayak and Lay and Hako escrow count as a base of him. Ado, we only need a couple things that we need to get forward again. A shade out Ahut is naturally, aid out Kodo. The Nekayak and not Lay a basically needle. Now, but he that Ado Askandas, he that in that Hona clone that is kind of so even Yedolish, a hot eyes and Eastern Agency, Ade hot Adolish and Ido Kodosang, I a needy and Herbert and Rico, and Kisa not clear getting the great horse at the door is on the ski, what I Kaya kitchen dado shadow and general age in the mission detail. But Edison I share the Kodo Nakadahosh I a member of RDC Naha his nation show share on solely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Enrico. Aron Heinze. Honorable members of RDC, any comments or questions for Mr. Anthony Begay or Mr. Herbert Enrico?
Chairman.
Honorable Freeland, go ahead.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Begay, Mr. Enrico. Chairman, though, committee members, Mr. Enrico and the Eastern Land Board have been pressing for an office. And I think I really applaud our land boards really collectively working on a lot of their issues to their respective districts. And they meet a lot, and they meet as districts, and they meet, of course, at the chapter level. Like I said, I have 3 districts. And when we meet as a chapter, the 8 chapters a year, our land boards are always present to make reports and updating of anything from tally counts to feral horses to everything, the drought. So I really appreciate our land boards for all that they do across Eastern Navajo. And I think it's something we need to really consider. How can we get them in office? Office space is hard here in Crown Point. The chapter is trying to develop an administrative complex right near the flea market, and it would be housed to have all of the programs under one roof. And we tried to get a office space at the shopping center, but of course we were denied because the shopping center stated that they want that for businesses and not for offices. So FYI, just heads up, that's something that the land boards are asking, and I would definitely support that. I am in support of that. But we got to find them a space. So, Eddie, Chairman, colleagues, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Freeland, for your question. I believe there was a request also, as we know, for the Water Rights Commission office, and that also needs to be funded because the water of the Navajo Nation is very important. And I'm sure Eastern Navajo Land Board, the work they do out there is just as important as well. So perhaps at the next budget cycle, we can make some recommendations for that and see what they would need as far as an office space, as well as employees, staff that will be there to work, and how many and everything. All that needs to be vetted as well, Honorable Freeland. So, Honorable Freeland. Any other comments or questions, honorable members of RDC?
Chairman.
Shinanda, Kuroa, Mr. Anthony Begay pointed out to us also, data escrow count noya hatzi, a kodi escrow beso ki ashit ended at Sunday Chagahot Zanjo Hanal to be placed in the general account. But how much of it do they get back to work with at the local level to improve the range management, the rangeland out there? And that is a question that we should probably explore also, Honorable Freeland. And I believe if some of these monies do, if it's paid by the grazing officials, perhaps some of these could go back to the local level to improve, like windmills and earthen dams and such, just whatever we can do to improve the local rangeland. Just something to put out there. And any other comments or questions? If not, we will.
Mr. Chairman?
One of the recommendations that were made was to have a meeting, a tri-party meeting, to agree on the modifications to the Memorandum of Understanding from BLM, BIA, and Eastern Navajo Land Board. When you all have this meeting and discuss what you all would agree to amend this agreement, thereafter, we can have a follow-up meeting with RDC, and all these can be presented. And at that time, perhaps Honorable Freeland can be appointed as the sponsor of this legislation, since he's from Eastern, and RDC, we do oversee land as well. So that I would like to put out there as well. Who was that wants to speak?
Mr. Chairman, this is Leo Watcher in the Department of Ag. I just have a point of clarification. So we're all understanding about this escrow fund.
Mr. Watchman, go ahead. What is your question, sir?
I did. Again, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. It was made reference, I guess, talked about there was $1 million that was transferred over to the Navajo Nation several years back. There's probably some explanations to that, and I wasn't working for the Department of Ag, but I can see why there's concerns to that. But overall, the Navajo Nation, within annual budgeting, provides a fixed cost fee payment that goes out to states or other government entities. In this case, the reason for the $1 million, it was basically assumed that it was the nation already paid the grazing fee on behalf of the permit holder. And so the nation was received the monies later from the BIA. And so again, the controller's position at that time was it was more or less a reimbursement back to the nation since they've already paid a fee annually. The fees that have been collected and seeing the escrow account has built up, but the annual fee collection is not as strong as it was, say, 20 years ago. There are less permit holders, so we're probably dealing with anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 annually, but it has accumulated to the $900,000. So it's this clarification is not $900,000 annually. It's roughly around $30,000 to $40,000. BIA probably has a better number, but that's what's collected on behalf of Navajo Nation, our permit holders. So again, the thought was that avoiding that money going to the Navajo Nation and assume as general revenue, and also with indication that initially when we started this process, the controller's office basically said that you would have to apply a indirect cost to that. So that, I guess, just reiterating our avenue was to have the monies go to the Eastern Land Board, or Eastern Land Ranch Management, Land Management. And the mechanism which RDC basically created was that we receive outside revenue and in forms of fee, whether it be grazing fee or other. And so even managing equip projects. So I just want to have a clarification because I think we kind of got off the wrong direction. I just want to have understanding that there is the thought process in place to get monies on the ground, and in reference to developing a revenue stream for we can create, plans for projects in the future. The initial windfall would be the $900,000, but annually after that, it's not more than $50,000. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Honorable members of RDC, any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, this
Ms.
is
Iako? Ms. Iako, could you ask your question first?
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Nez, members of RDC. So the question is to Leo in his clarification, and I apologize if I didn't understand the clarification, but I just also want to make sure that we're on the same page as well. Mentioning that there was the payment to the nation for fees that were already made on behalf of grazing permittee holders by the Navajo Nation. Does that mean that the $30,000 to $40,000 allocation, or I'm sorry, the $50,000 annual allocation to the escrow account would automatically be reverted to the nation because that is in place of the payment for what the nation has already made on behalf of the grazing permittees? I just need clarification on that portion, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Iako. Mr. Watchman?
Mr. Chair, basically what we're saying is that the nation, these monies have accumulated, but there is a obligation to the fee itself. Who is charging the fee? The BLM is charging the fee, the majority of the fees, and the BIA is collecting. But the nation still is responsible since it's an agreement with the Navajo Nation in lieu of a permit holder. So the nation pays that up front annually as a part of the fixed cost annually. And it's fluctuated, but we've had some land exchanges, we've had some other things that that number has been up and down. I think it's more on the downside currently, but we haven't received the escrow amount, so it's just accumulated. The intent is that, seeing that there's several years of collection, that we would just assume that as revenue for Eastern Land Management and create what is referred to as a proprietary. And the proprietary would have the ability to budget out EQIP projects or projects for those permit holders, as opposed to if we were to receive those funds and it goes directly to the general fund, then you have to go through the annual allocation, which I think that was indicated earlier that it's whoever has the wherewithal or the to get the budget through. I wouldn't want to subject those permit holders to doing that. I think we're trying to safeguard them so it can go back directly to their purpose. However, I just made a point is way back when the $1 million was not redistributed back to the Eastern land, the position of the controller's office was that we basically paid your fees ahead of time and we were reimbursed as a nation. So it should be put back into the general fund reserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watchman, for your response. Honorable members of RDC, any other comments or questions? None? Thank you very much, everybody, for getting on the call today. Thank you, Mr. Lester Sosi, your staff over there, as well as Mr. Tafoya from BLM, and Mr. Enrico and Mr. Anthony Begay, and all the grazing permittees on Eastern. So we have decided that the three parties need to meet and discuss their amendments, and afterwards present that to RDC, and I believe Honorable Freeland, since he's from Eastern, will be the sponsor of the legislation to amend the MOU. So with that, honorable members of RDC, any other comments, last statements?
Chairman Freeland.
Honorable Freeland, go ahead.
Chairman, thank you. I just want to say thank you to our land boards. Mr. Enrico, Mr. Begay, thank you for your comments as well. We want to make sure that all of our land boards are collectively understanding and really moving forward with the amendments. And I'll if you don't mind, Chairman, I want to work with the land boards on this, and we can come back together. I really want to be alongside them when they do meet as three groups. So I'll be there to support them, and I'll be there to help any way that I can. But understandably, I appreciate you all as committee members listening in and educating yourselves fully. So when this legislation does come before the committee, you already have an understanding and an insight as to what needs to be done. And everything that was discussed today, from feral horse to escrow to grazing, everything that was brought up today will be brought up again at some point and another in the future. So I just want to say thank you to all of our land boards, District 15, District 16, District 19, and District 20. Thank you very much. Those of you that are out there, we really need to support you all continuously. And we have a huge job in front of us. You all have a huge job in front of you as well. But the work that you do each and every day, it's not easy. And I used to tease my land boards that, I should get you all a deputy badge, because you get so involved with complex issues, even when it comes to some sort of that involves rangers or involves enforcement, and you get involved with these disputes. And I just want to say, please take care of yourselves and be careful out there, because we have a vast area. And maybe an idea for the escrow, or maybe even AIF, is to look at enforcement out here in Eastern. We only have one ranger for 31 chapters. So just some thought and some foresight as to how can we look at range enforcement out here too as well, because it's real important when it comes to situations like that. So I just want to say thank you again, Chairman, to everyone on this call. Yeah.
Thank you for scheduling this and recommending to schedule this. We did learn a lot, Honorable Freeland, as the Oversight, Resources and Development Committee as to what all this entails, and it is time for all three to come to the table and make some recommendations to amend their agreement. So, and to probably go over, like we did this morning, their duties and responsibilities at each organization. So, thank you all very much. Yes.
Superintendent comment here.
Superintendent Sosi?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
I just want to, I guess, as a closing comment, just want to reiterate that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is here to provide technical assistance. We really appreciate Delegate Freeland, his proactive work that he does on land issues and really working, I think, on behalf of the producers and permittees out there. And really appreciate the Land Board for their questions, their comments. I think a lot of these questions that they pose are sometimes difficult questions. From the Bureau of Indian Affairs, we don't shy away from that. And certainly we work to provide answers to those difficult questions that they might have. And we certainly will continue to work with the Land Board, the permittees, the allottees, and many of those stakeholders that we mentioned in our presentation. Will certainly also continue to work with Bureau of Land Management on their land management work that they do. So really, I also want to express our appreciation from our side for you, Mr. Chair, and your committee members. I want to reserve a couple of minutes for our regional director to make some closing comments, if that's possible, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yes, most certainly. Mr. Mahoja, you have the floor, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you may proceed.
Okay, good. Sorry, thank you. It was wasn't clear whether my mic was working. Thank you, Superintendent Sosi, and Mr. DeGroat and your team. I appreciate all of the background information, insight, the work that has been done on this project in the past, and we're here and committed to work on this project in the future with the tribe, with BLM, and to continue working with the RDC committee, Chairman Nez, and your folks. Anything that we can do to be of assistance to prevent some of the issues that the tri-party agreement seeks to engage in, we're here to work on, and we look forward to it. So thank you very much for having time for us today and for having our team do their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahoja, EIA staff, and also Mr. Tafoya. Would you like to make a statement, sir?
Just again, appreciate the time and everybody's interest and participation today, and look forward to working with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And before we adjourn here today, I would like to just say thank you to Mr. Clyde Yazzie for giving us a guided tour out at White Horse Lake during RDC's drought tour. Mr. Yazzie, Mr. Enrico Nesto. Just want to say thank you. You all be safe out there.
Chairman.
Take good care of yourself, and may God bless each and every one of you.
Chairman.
We're going to officially adjourn at 11:46.
Thank you. Safe.